Welcome to Backstage Pass. I'm Tara, and my guest today is Sam Adonis. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's always wonderful to be here in MCW Studios and work with MCW in general.
Well, thank you for that. You know, we were just talking before we sat down about how it's been like 2 years since we had you on the podcast as a guest.
It's been,
it's like a year and a half. It's been a long time.
It's flown by though, actually, because it's just, I mean, everything kind of post-pandemic has just sped up.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe that a lot of that was 2 years ago, but it's great to finally be back into a busy swing of things, not just for myself, but with MCW as well.
Yeah. So speaking of busy, you are a guy on the go. You are all over the place, particularly in Mexico. Tell us a little bit about that.
I'm very fortunate. I've always been really weird about my approach on the wrestling business. I grew up around wrestling, and I've always kind of been, I hate to use the word omniscient because I know I don't know everything, but I've always had my finger on the pulse of whatever's happening elsewhere. I always try to get myself out there and be seen. And I've been very fortunate to find the right opportunities at the right time. I'm sure it's happened to a lot of people, but the pandemic has affected so many people at so many different points in time, where I think specifically the pandemic came out right as I was on the verge of something good. So it kind of makes it feel like I had a little bit slower of a going, but it's nice to know that I was able to pick back up where things left off. And that includes, you know, working with AAA in Mexico and now with MLW and just staying busy in the independents all across the country. It's cool to be here. This is the high level independent shows. I feel like, you know, when it comes to something like an AEW, I was kind of like the generation after that era. You know, and had there not been a pandemic, who's to say where I'd be right now?
Right.
But I'm definitely, you know, optimistic about the way things are going, and I'm busy, which is all you ask for.
Well, now during the pandemic, did Mexico reopen for events and stuff much sooner than the U.S. did?
Honestly, Mexico is still more strict about the closures than the United States. Really? You wouldn't believe it. Mexico City is very, very cautious and progressive, if you will, as far as masks and that sanitizer. To this day. I ended up going back to Mexico in May of 2021, but I think the first 5 months of shows had no crowds. So their TV had no crowds as well. And it was really difficult and just strenuous because just to get back in the United States every time I had to take the COVID test, Mexico City Airport is probably the craziest airport in North America. And that's without COVID-19. I had to add, 2.5 hours before every trip to go get my blood work done, and just to let them just be allowed on the plane. So the one time I was flying home from one of these smaller cities, and I was not allowed to come back home. So I stayed there for about 6 hours till I got my negative test, and it was just an oversight that shouldn't have happened, but something I have to deal with.
That's got to be so frustrating, especially. I mean, we're doing that international travel, at a time when most people weren't even traveling.
It's funny because, as far as, look at the grand scheme of the way wrestling is now, prior to the AEW coming out, international touring was such a big part of wrestling. Now it seems like since the pandemic and so many of the independent wrestlers being signed with an AEW, there's not as many international tours there used to be.
Right.
So as far as flying, I'm probably in and out of Mexico twice a month at least. So it's kind of cool knowing that I'm as far as the international wrestling scene goes, there's not too many people that are consistently flying back and forth as much as me. Even though there's a lot of guys in Japan staying there, having the big tours there a long time.
Now, you mentioned Japan. Is that something that you'd like to do as well?
I've actually worked in Japan 4 times.
Wow.
All Japan Pro Wrestling, which was awesome. I actually really got my feet under the door there right before the pandemic, obviously. I was getting ready to feud with a guy named Sawama, who was one of the probably top 20 stars in the last 20 years. Big star. Had everything all set up to go a singles program with him. And then my boss, who was Jun Akiyama, who was now with Noah and was just on AEW a few weeks ago, he left All Japan. I was his guy. So that kind of that happened before the pandemic, but then the pandemic happened. And, I was just getting into my groove in Japan, but we'll see. I think I'll be back there sooner than later.
Yeah.
It's good. AAA's doing big business all over, now the United States as well, but they're seeing in Japan. And I think just the more stock I get as an individual performer, it's all going to work out with other opportunities as well.
Yeah. Now the crowds are different in all of these places. So do you have a favorite? Like, what crowd do you really love performing in front of?
I love the Mexican crowd, but this is a topic I could have a 20-minute YouTube video on myself because I think a lot of times wrestlers are complicated. Yes, crowds are different. The people are different, but human nature remains the same. And a lot of times, the people try to think, oh, it's in Japan. We need to be more hard and kill each other, or it's Mexico. We need to flip more. And that's not necessarily the emotion that you need to invoke from these people. they have an idea of what an American wrestler is, and they want expect you to live up to their expectations. So a lot of times I've been able to really deliver all over the world because I am what the rest of the world sees as an American wrestler. 6'4" blonde guy that doesn't do their style.
Right.
But when you figure out how to mix that with their local styles and understand their people and understand the jokes or the folklore or something like that, mix it all together. Yeah, I think that's kind of a secret ingredient why I've been able to be a good villain wherever I've gone.
Yeah. Now, do you speak Spanish?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
I learned on Tinder. Yeah.
I did not expect that. I was thinking to say Duolingo or whatever.
Well, when you're submerged, when you have no option, I ended up in Mexico and everything moves so quick. A 2 week trip turned into 2 years.
Wow.
So, and needless to say, being a young single man at the time, I was able to enjoy the fruits of Tinder.
Okay.
And every night I had, different conversations with different people, and repetition, practice makes perfect. So now I'm fluent. Puedo hablar contigo esta conversación en español.
Wow. See, I know nothing of the Spanish language, so great.
It's pretty cool because nobody expects it. I'm like,
No, definitely.
Yeah.
I figured with all that travel, you must have at least picked up a working knowledge of the language.
Definitely.
But it sounds like you fully immersed yourself.
That's one of the things that I never would have expected out of wrestling. And there's so many things like that are super cool about being able to just travel the world and just, learn. I think wrestling is special because a lot of times so many wrestlers come from such various backgrounds, but I hate to use the word uneducated because there's very many educated wrestlers, but for all intents and purposes, a lot of the wrestlers are, they might be educated because of their football background or some other interest they have. They're not, scholastically gifted, or they're not necessarily into the cultural scene. Wrestlers are so interested because they go so many places. We have so many stories about so many cultures, so many people, and it's next thing you know, it's like you hear about. They always talk about how wrestlers are they take a back seat to football players or reality based stars, and I mean personally, I think that the pro wrestler that really lives an international lifestyle and does this around the world is way more interesting than the guy that won the silver medal in the Olympics. Because he's, his life. His life is pretty straightforward. Since 12 to 22, he's spent in a warehouse getting ready for the Olympics. But the wrestler that started off a fat kid in Monroeville, Pennsylvania, moved here, got that, did there, and now a million miles, a million stories later. I personally would rather hear my story than the guy, that's.
Absolutely, yeah. There's lots of different twists and turns, and
Exactly.
as you briefly mentioned, you came, you grew up in wrestling, or you came from a wrestling family.
Yeah, it's definitely helped. It's like I said, being aware of everything and just being. I equate it to the fact that I was kind of so obsessed with it. I was just kind of more of a geek than everybody. But the I don't believe in luck, but the things that I have, that I would put down to luck would be the fact that I'm 6'4", and I have, I'm not shy.
Right.
Those are two things I didn't really have any bearings over from my personal experience, but those two things have added so much to being the biggest nerd. And as far as being a wrestling nerd, everybody wants to be the top guy. Everybody wants to be famous. Everybody wants to. Everybody loves the business. But there's so many people that see through that. So many people. If you really love the business, you can't BS me. If you try to talk to me about wrestling, how much you love it, I can tell if you actually love it.
Right.
And there's a lot of promoters out there, Dan being one of them. I think that's what brought me here to MCW is the conversations you have, and you can be around someone and know that person's different. That person actually has passion. That person actually loves this. I want to work with that guy. So, for everybody that's trying to figure out the shortcut and the thing they have to do to go viral, get famous, get the WWE contract, just put everything into wrestling. Just love it, study it, learn it, get as good as you can at it. And people appreciate that.
Very true. Very true.
It's worked for me.
It seems like it certainly is working for you. Now, can our fans find you on social media?
Yes, I remember. Instagram, Real Sam Adonis, and Twitter, Real Sam Adonis. I think I need to get on that TikTok, but I don't. I'm already so spread thin with travel. Maybe something. There's got to be something there that's funny. I just got to figure out my angle. But like I said, I'm too busy being a wrestling nerd.
You could find a way to make like a wrestling nerd TikTok channel.
Maybe something with some Spanish too. There's something there.
Yes. Well, the great thing is it can be quick. These are like 15-second viral moments, So I don't know.
I already spend too much time on my phone. I really don't need to get it more.
Well, the next time you're stuck in an airport for 6 hours or something, now you know what to do.
Okay?
All right. So thank you all for joining us here at Backstage Pass, and thank you, Sam, for sitting down with me and chatting.
Thanks so much.